West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire. Revoir un latte.
Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with Republicans leaning in on dismantling a woman's right to choose. We face the first big test tomorrow in the political fight for abortion rights when the U.S. Senate will vote on legislation to codify those rights into law. The legislation, however, lacks the 60 votes needed to defeat a Senate filibuster and is expected to fail. This is a moment of real fear and confusion and heartbreak for millions of Americans who stand on the brink of having their bodily autonomy snatched away from them. But for the religious right, it is an excuse for celebration. It is the Holy Grail, finally within reach, the culmination of its decades-long battle to end abortion rights in America. In fact, the religious right is so entrenched in anti-abortion politics, it's arguably their most defining issue. There's even an origin story about this movement being a reaction to the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. But that's what they want you to think. It's a myth, a hoax, a lie. Back in 2014, Dartmouth historian Randall Balmer did a deep dive into the real origins of the religious right. He also revisited the topic in a piece that dropped today. As Balmer notes, before and for several years after Roe, evangelicals were overwhelmingly indifferent to the subject of abortion, which they considered to be a Catholic issue. According to experts featured in the PBS special God in America, even famed televangelist Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, the founder of the Moral Majority, had very little interest in the issue.
It was Catholic leaders more than evangelical leaders at the beginning who were most concerned about Roe v. Wade. In fact, Pat Robertson kind of famously said after the decision was issued that it wasn't necessarily a big concern of his.
Dad was the one who talked Jerry Falwell personally in taking a stand on abortion. Before that, Jerry Falwell said, that's a Catholic issue. It's nothing to do with us. Why would I want to take a stand on that? I'm just a preacher. I want to talk about the gospel.
Now, keep in mind, evangelical Christians were largely apolitical back then. Paul Weyrich, co-founder of the Heritage Foundation and the architect of the religious right, well, he wanted to change that. As Balmer, the historian, explains, the hypothetical moral majority needed a catalyst around which to rally. Weyrich kicked around ideas, pornography, prayer in schools, even abortion. The galvanizing issue would not be abortion, not yet. It was, in fact, an organized fight to protect Christian schools from racial integration. That's right. It was school segregation, not abortion, that brought white evangelical Christians to the polls. Their activism emerged after another Supreme Court decision, 1950s Brown versus the Board of Education decision, which changed the law but not the racism. So white parents were taking their kids out of integrated schools, particularly in the South, and putting them into private schools, segregation academies, as they were labeled. Decades later, religious leaders blamed fellow evangelical and Democratic President Jimmy Carter for IRS actions that removed tax breaks previously enjoyed by those private schools that failed to integrate. though the policy was mandated, in fact, by Nixon. But as Ballmer notes, defending school segregation really wasn't the best look for a movement ostensibly based on Christ's teachings. So evangelical leaders searched for a more palatable rallying cry, the key issue that would unite evangelicals around the Republican Party. That issue would become abortion. 5 years later, after Roe, Jerry Falwell gave his very first anti-abortion speech during the midterm election year of 1978. The work of Falwell and Weyrich continued with a fever pitch leading up to the 1980 presidential election, and a movement was born.
Abortion is not a Roman Catholic issue. It is a moral issue, an issue that concerns the human rights of unborn babies who, by the hundreds of thousands, are being murdered in these United States of America.
We're told about a woman's right to control her own body, but doesn't the unborn child have a higher right, and that is to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
I am pro-life, and I will be appointing pro-life judges.
Do you want to see the court overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, that will happen.
But the right knows how easy it is to be on the wrong end of the culture war, which is why it wasn't enough to just sink its teeth into the Republican Party. They also had to stack the courts. Now pay attention to this name, Leonard Leo, vice president of the Conservative Federalist Society, whose list of potential justices Republican presidents, including Donald Trump, drew from time and time again during their presidencies. Leo, according to his media guy, knew that the right had lost the culture wars on everything from segregation to contraception to abortion and liberalized Hollywood. So the only way to impose the quote unquote right thinking was to take the courts. And with his list, he and the Republican Party were perfectly positioned to cement a conservative majority, to give the right everything they ever wanted, a repeal of the promise and progress of the 20th century. And joining me now is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, who serves on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Senator Whitehouse, always good to have you on. You have been one of the lonely voices, letting people know about Leonard Leo and trying to get people to focus on this man. You even had a chart up during the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearings. Talk about Leonard Leo's influence in essentially stealing the Supreme Court for the religious right.
So what they did, Leonard Leo was an operative of the Federalist Society. And what they did was they set up within the Federalist Society the selection process for at least the last 3 Supreme Court justices. I don't want to say that the Federalist Society decided it. I think the Federalist Society hosted it. We don't know who was in the room making the actual picks, but we do know that Leonard Leo was wired tight with Don McGahn, Trump's White House counsel, and with Mitch McConnell, who was breaking every possible Supreme Court rule in the Senate to try to pack the court with his judges, and that he had the intention to change the way the American courts see basic rights. And he was going for the courts for exactly the reason you said, which is that they had failed and failed and failed again in the democratic parts of the government. They'd just been blown out. They hadn't been able to accomplish the extreme things they wanted. So they were going to pack the courts with extremists who would act irrespective of public opinion.
And, the thing is, what they did, and as you said, I'm glad you brought Mitch McConnell into this. I mean, there was the chicanery, the McConnell chicanery, denying President Obama his right to choose a member of the Supreme Court, not even giving a hearing to Merrick Garland at the time, but also the lying. These people were prepped very well to get up and say stare decisis and to lie and to pretend that they didn't have this preordained mission to take down Roe. And I'm assuming also to take down the rulings that made contraception illegal. Eventually they'll go for gay marriage. They're going to go for everything, because what Weyrich really talked about was the fact that they just haven't been able to win these culture wars. And so people, not only do they want to take away rights from people who they think have the wrong thinking, but to give extra rights to those who do have in their mind the right thinking, special rights, corporations, etc. But I want to ask you about this, because one of the things that bothers a lot of people about the fact that, you know, Brett Kavanaugh is part of this decision. This guy was investigated for like 4 seconds by the FBI for a credible accusation of assault. You've been one of the senators who said that it was an inadequate investigation. Were these people even properly vetted for lifetime seats on the court? And I mean him specifically.
Brett Kavanaugh was not properly vetted, and we pretty well know it. We know that the FBI was not allowed to do a proper supplemental background investigation once this charge was raised. We know that the FBI very unusually became impervious to information. It was repelling people who were trying to bring it information about Brett Kavanaugh. And we know that when they finally had to give in and accept information, they did that through a tip line, and that the tip line violated the FBI's own tip line procedures, and instead of being sent for investigation, was sent to the Whitehouse for presumably a decent burial. So everything about the supplemental BI into Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's allegations was tanked by the FBI, which takes political pressure at the highest levels.
Yeah. Let me ask you very quickly before we go. You've had Ted Cruz lie about the protesters who are in front of the homes of some of these justices, basically saying they're the real thugs and brutes, not the people on January 6th who he calls regular protesters. But you have had serial violence. Let's just put up this clip. Ms. Magazine put it together. 11 murders, 26 attempted murders, 956 threats of harm, 624 stalking incidents, kidnappings, bombings, arsons, attempted bombings. These are the things that have happened in front of clinics that are providing abortions. Why is it that the Supreme Court has essentially ratified the idea that there needs to be, you know, the buffer zones get smaller and smaller around these clinics, but the Senate, which can't do anything, suddenly is passing extra protection for Supreme Court justices while stealing the rights of women?
I was the U.S. attorney in Rhode Island at the time of the Boston clinic shootings. Somebody went into one clinic, murdered the receptionist, shot some other individuals, and then went down the road to another clinic, murdered the receptionist there and shot some other individuals, and then got away on the road. And I went down to our Planned Parenthood clinic in Rhode Island with our U.S. Marshal and stood out front until we had police protection for that. So I remember very well the violence that was associated with those clinic protests. And you will have noticed that in the last Supreme Court hearing, the Republicans brought in a very sweet elderly lady to provide a narrative that everybody out front of the clinics was just providing love and support and compassion for people. When I remember having to push those people back, I remember when people in pink T-shirts had to give people safe passage through the screaming crowds, yelling murder, and it culminated in these shootings with two women murdered by this lunatic. So it was, these were ugly times, and to try to paper that over is really wrong.
It is Wednesday, the 11th of May of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these white evangelicals, these Opus Dei priests? Will no one? Boy, just letting you know, they're not doing God's work, all right? No, they're not. That's not God that they think that they are bowing down to. Looks like a fatted calf to me. Have you noticed that Trump does have a strong resemblance to the fatted calf of old? Jeez. And they bow down to him like he has some sort of, I don't know, spiritual connection to the spirit world. Yeah, he's got a spiritual connection to the spirit world, that's for sure. Okay, well, the war against women continues apace. You know, we were in Ukraine, and then suddenly, without being, I don't know, there were some people who said, had deep intel, and they warned us for, I don't know, decades, that at some point they were really going to, invade, our Donbass down there. So, I don't know. Grab them right by the uterus, I suppose. It's okay. The problem with religious extremism is that they're full of hypocrites, and then they just laugh at you. I'm tired of it. It's time we throw some more inside heaters, and you know what I mean by that? Yeah, someone leaked the draft report. Someone did. Could have been the right wing. Could have been Jenny Thomas. Could have been. But generally, we don't really act quickly enough. And in this instance, I think that we, the people, have had enough. And that's why you have a Ted Cruz going on national cable TV, I guess it was Fox, with pictures of candlelights and writing in chalk, saying that the 20,000 people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th were just peaceful picnickers. And yet they're showing this candlelight vigil out in this, I don't know, it looks like on a street. And we're told it's in front of Alito's house. And then we're told it's in front of John Roberts' house. And then Kavanaugh's house. And they're literally singing Kumbaya, not hang Mike Pence. Okay? I mean, I can understand why Ted Cruz would think that January 6th was just, a maggot picnic. Because that's how maggot picnics are. Smear shit on the walls. You know how you can tell a rat is a rat? When they shit where they eat. Okay, so there were a lot of rats in the Capitol that day, turning it into a rat's nest. Couldn't call in the National Guard. Nope, couldn't do that. But special laws were made to protect those justices from the onslaught of this violent mob of candlelight kumbaya singers. Okay. I suppose a flower in the barrel of a gun is a very threatening gesture to, I don't know, the killers. How dare you be nice? Okay. Is that where we are? Yes, indeed. That is exactly where we are. Well, we had quite a bit of a longer opening because I wanted to get all of that in, including the breakdown of how much terrorism has occurred just in the past year against women seeking health care. As opposed to, Codify Roe. That caused Susan Collins to call the cops on a public sidewalk with washable ink. And then they had to send out a city worker to clean it off. And you know what that means. Yeah, there's probably a minimum. Okay, so much for, the free expression of your First Amendment rights. Hey, Ellen, what are you going to do about it? I mean, Elon, whatever your name is. Yeah, blood emerald apartheid. Okay, he's going to bring Trump back, too. Because apparently, according to him, and, it's true, that banning Trump from Twitter alienated a large portion of the population. And I'm thinking, having him on there alienated a larger part of the population, and Twitter made a business decision. What's your problem? Even now, Tesla could not exist without government subsidies. So shut the F up, blood emerald heir, apartheid businessman. And I'm serious when I talk about that. He is being sued still for the apartheid practices at Tesla. In San Leandro, if you want to know the exact location. That factory. Okay. I like the idea of electric cars and battery storage and all that. It's just that Musk did not develop any of that. He bought the company. He's no scientific engineer. He's no Tony Stark. Give me a break. All right. He's not Batman either, okay? He's Lex Luthor. Maybe not that bad. Not that, yeah, I don't know. He's not quite the Penguin, but somewhere in between. Somewhere between Lex Luthor and the Penguin. That's Elon Musk. Is that how his name is pronounced? Elon? I just like to refer to him as the blood emerald heir to an apartheid fortune. A little wordy, but it works for me. Okay, what's on the rest of the menu here? In the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fine Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, a lovely egg dish with a lovely velvety hollandaise sauce. Oh, you know what? Before I begin, I should give an update on what happened on my mom's birthday. Yes, I took my mom to dinner last night to a very lovely restaurant on the river, the Rogue River, called, surprisingly, the River's Edge. And we had a lovely time, and they treated her quite lovingly, and she had a great day and dinner. So and as she is wont to do, she had enough to bring home, because she always does that. I have to bring something home. Okay, Mom, we could order something else, bring home. No, I'm just going to save some of this. All right. So it was great, though, and hug your moms if you got them, because, hey, it's a transitory experience here in this plane of existence. All right, on the rest of the menu here, the Tennessee attorney who fought to overturn Biden's election win in Michigan has ties to Russian agents, and not just Maria Butina either. The pandemic is getting tougher to track as COVID testing plunges. Exactly. Well, actually, the testing's gone up. No one's reporting them because they're all home tests. And California laid out a plan to drastically cut fossil fuel use. I guess Texas and Florida are going to sue them now. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the Paraguay organized crime prosecutor was slain on a Colombian beach as he honeymooned with his new wife. And an El Salvadoran court sentenced a woman who suffered an obstetric emergency that ended her pregnancy to 30 years in prison for aggravated murder, coming to a country called the USA near you. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. We need the help. So click on that link and maybe you can help us. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. And thank you and Kelly for doing everything that you do, more than just taking care of the chat room and the Twitter feed. Thanks. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and try to get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms before the show, sometimes after. I'm sorry. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, wherever podcasts can be found, and of course the Deep State Archive of the Netroots Radio Library, in which West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is part of, can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. Indeed. All right. Matt Cohen and Brian Walsh of the American Independent bring us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Tennessee attorney who worked on a Michigan lawsuit alleging voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election has a history of working with Russian nationals. An investigation by the American Independent Foundation has found the lawyer, G. Klein Preston IV, worked with a conservative legal group in Michigan as part of an effort to overturn the election results in the state where Joe Biden defeated former President Donald Trump by a slim margin in 2020. Now, this guy, Kevin Preston IV, G. Klein Preston IV, he said that Russia is much better at running elections than the United States, so I guess that's why he's helping the GOP with his deep ties to Russian agents. Preston has worked for Republican politicians and causes as a legal advisor for nearly 2 decades because the Russians play the long game. He has said he is family friends with Marsha Blackburn, whose campaign he represented in 2005 as it was being investigated for possible finance violations. He gave legal advice to Blackburn's 2007 House campaign and worked with her as recently as 2014. Preston has a long history of sharing pro-Confederate propaganda on social media. He even quoted a former KKK leader in one of the many books he's written. In 2013, Preston sent a tweet suggesting that Obama is not American, the same birther conspiracy theory that Trump pushed when he ran for president. And then it goes on, during the effort to get the Michigan Supreme Court to hear their case, the Great Lakes Justice Center's lawyers, in which this guy's a part of, filed affidavits from 47 witnesses who alleged they saw voter fraud during the vote count at Huntington Place, the convention center in Detroit, where the voting and vote counting was conducted. Among the affidavits is a sworn statement from Preston that identifies him as, quote, an attorney for the GOP in Michigan on November 3rd and 4th, 2020. In the statement, Preston claimed that election officials at the venue where the vote counting took place intentionally set up their process in an obscured area so Republican election observers could not see what they were doing. On November 23rd of 2020, the Michigan Canvassing Board voted to certify the state's election results, with one of 2 Republicans joining the Democratic board members in the state because no fraud or cheating was taking place. But this guy was doing Putin's work, and he was doing it for the GOP. Laura Unger of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Testing for COVID-19 has plummeted across the globe, making it much tougher for scientists to track the course of the pandemic and spot new, worrisome viral mutants as they emerge and spread. Experts say testing has dropped by 70 to 90% worldwide from the first to the second quarter of this year. The opposite of what they say should be happening, with new Omicron variants on the rise in places such as the United States and South Africa. We're not seeing testing anywhere near where we might need to see it, said Dr. Krishna Udayakumar, who directs the Duke Global Health Innovation Center at Duke University. We need the ability to ramp up testing as we're seeing the emergence of new waves or surges to track what's happening and then respond. Reported daily cases in the U.S., for example, are averaging about 74,000, up more than 40% over the past 2 weeks, according to data compiled by Johns Hopkins. But that is a vast undercount because of the testing downturn and the fact tests are being taken at home and not reported to health departments. Brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. New homes built in California starting in 2026 will need to be powered by all-electric furnaces, stoves, and other appliances if California is to meet its ambitious climate change goals over the next 2 decades, according to a state pollution reduction plan released yesterday, Tuesday. The roadmap by the California Air Resources Board sets the state on a path to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, meaning as much carbon is removed from the air as is emitted. We got to do better than that, but it's a start. The state's timeline is among the most ambitious in the nation. Hawaii has a similar goal, and some other states have a 2050 deadline. California could reach its goals through a drastic transition away from fossil fuels that power trucks, cars, planes, ships, homes, businesses, and other sectors of the economy. The board staff recommends the state cut the use of oil and gas by 91%. That's going to make a bunch of people mad now, isn't it? Just like it made the whale oil guys mad. Remember those days? You don't? I'll remind you. All right, the plan was put together by Air Board staff, and it is not final. Is anything? A public comment process will begin, and the political appointees who make up the board will ultimately decide whether to make any changes, because apparently they know better than the rest of us. All right, let's get to our break. No, they might, but this is great that California's doing this, because as we know, California leads the nation in these sorts of things, and we need more states to follow suit. But it looks like actually a lot of states have been following suit, and California just upped the ante. Alrighty, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, getting medieval on your ass. When current hot new director Robert Eggers was a kid, Eggers, whose Hamlet precursor Viking tale The Northman is now in theaters, close on the heels of his surreal The Lighthouse. Anyway, when Eggers was a kid, he, like many other boys, discovered superhero comics. But then, a family friend introduced Eggers to some Renaissance engravings, plunging him into the world of medieval Western Europe, its images and its stories. This biographical fact helps make sense of The Northman, because to tell this Icelandic tale, Eggers and co-writer Icelandic poet Sean have used a medieval style of storytelling. So, in medieval tales, plot is king, but is handled differently than we're used to. There's not really much concern for suspense or arcs. It's just this thing happens, and then this, and then this. Themes are mostly non-existent, incidental at best, and character follows a whole different set of rules. People can be motivated by emotion, but primarily a supernatural force tells you what to do, and you either do it or you don't to reap the rewards or suffer the consequences. Toss psychology and character depth. Here's where you are, what you have, and what you must do. Go. This style can be hard for people used to realism and naturalism influenced melodrama, people addicted to, well, so-and-so wouldn't really do that. That thinking will only kill your enjoyment of The Northman. Why does Olga fall for Amleth? Because her gods tell her to. When Amleth finds his father-murdering uncle, why not kill him right there and then? Because he's been told his fate is to take revenge at the fiery gates of hell. To be honest, considering how streamlined your storytelling becomes, I'm surprised more movies aren't told using medieval rules. Eggers specifically wanted this level of simplicity to focus on visually and experientially immersing you into his strange mythic testosterone trip, which is The Northman's true strength. That and giving Anna Taylor-Joy another chance to define a character through her hair color. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Ashley Patt. You might say that Guillermo Pons is a scientific monster hunter, even though he thinks that term, monster, never really captured his subjects right.
So they are regular animals that have gone through different developmental processes that would end up building a body that is not what you expect.
What this researcher based in Madrid, Spain actually loves is the oddly amazing animals. After all, he studies two-headed worms.
We have these worms that are usually regular worms, like with one head and one tail, and that's normal, but sometimes they may have two heads or two tails. And on the other side, there are worms which have one head and many tails always.
Officially, he looks at bifurcated annelids, meaning things like earthworms that have come out of their larval stage with two heads, or spontaneously sprouted two tails, or some other combination of mixed up appendages. We know that certain species, like some salamanders and insects, have the ability to regrow appendages in a time of need. But there's this one phylum of worms, the annelids, that can regrow unlike anything else that we've ever seen in the kingdom. Their segmented bodies, like an earthworm with rows of ringed compartments, help them easily regrow a new head or tail at the first sign of trouble. Or even crazier, they can regrow an entirely new right side of their body if sliced in half.
Worms that do these crazy things that are very weird, very strange things that these worms should not, quote unquote, should not do.
Once Pons started studying the anatomically death-defying lengths to which these worms would go to grow and survive, he was totally pulled in. And he realized that he and his team weren't the first to be fascinated. Pons found that there was a golden age of research on monster creatures during the 18th and 19th centuries.
100-plus-year-old literature would refer to these animals as monstrous creatures or monsters or oddities or, there are all these variations that describe them. And in the end, these animals are not monsters.
A fixation with the reanimated monster makes sense, especially back then. Author Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein was published in 1818, and it only further intensified interest, and some of that interest translated into actual research. Pons and a team of international researchers conducted a wide-sweeping review of the existing knowledge about monster worms. They dove into 275 years' worth of research, combing through scientists' observational journals, reading historical texts, and even reaching out to the broader scientific community to see if anyone knew anything about records of abnormal worms. They wanted to understand all of the different types and patterns of bifurcation and see if there were any clues about how the oddities developed. Their search landed them in a jackpot of both history and science. They came across documents and drawings of bifurcated worms from around the world, in Latin, French, and German, all the way to Russian, Japanese, and even Indonesian. All in all, they spent over a year working through the archives, translating old texts, and following the trail of monster worm clues. What they learned is that bifurcation in worms has been observed in over 60 species of worms across the annelid family tree. And in some species, up to 20% of the juveniles ended up with some form of bifurcation. This work was recently published in the journal Biological Reviews.
And that means, for example, in the case of bifurcation, that when an animal is cut and is regenerating, for example, the tail, there then needs to be some mechanism that specifies where this tail is going to be, how is it's going to be oriented, what is posterior, what is anterior, what is left, what is right, what is dorsal, what is ventral. And these mechanisms can be disturbed, and this might lead to different anatomies. And that gives us clues about what is important during this process. Of course, these are the baby steps, so we are just pointing towards this process, this phenomenon. We are saying, okay, hello, this happens. There are these animals that are doing these weird things. We should not forget about them. Let's look into them.
They also realize that there's a strong correlation between the type of bifurcation and the internal organ development, meaning the way that the worms were split reliably indicated if extra sets of organs were present. With this type of intel, Pons and his team were able to essentially draw up a blueprint or how-to guide for reliably and repeatedly creating bifurcated worms, which is potentially a very useful resource for scientists interested in studying the mechanisms of development. This long-forgotten study of worm developmental anomalies seems poised for a comeback. According to Pons, this information could extend far beyond the annelid and even insect worlds to help us better understand how things like growth and development actually happen, in both the normal and the monster ways.
In a sense, we are now following this trend that they started then, studying these animals to try to understand bigger pictures in nature. Usually development leads to a certain way, to a certain point. So you have a development that ends up in an anatomy that's more or less conserved, but sometimes it doesn't. And that can teach us something about developmental processes, and that's interesting.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Ashley Papp.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Here are two terms you don't expect to see together: the state of Alabama and progressive leader. Okay, I'm a Texan, so I have no standing to point at the rank regressiveness of any other state government, but still, Alabama? And yet, the Camellia State has flowered as a model of strong progressive action in one area of critical public importance: quality child care. It's a cliche to say our children are our future, but it's also true. Why then do we invest so little in our littlest ones, our future? America's child care system is a national disgrace, failing to provide safe places for children of working parents and failing to boost the education of pre-kindergarten tykes. Moreover, the abject failure of state and national officials to meet this basic social need is spreading inequality, rolling back opportunities for women, and severely restricting economic progress. Yet, Alabama officials have recently been setting the national standard for effective pre-K programs by making a major investment in its 4- and 5-year-olds, operating a statewide child care network. A major factor in its success is a 2-generation approach, not only educating the kiddos, but also providing support materials and coaching so that parents engage as their children's first teachers. Producing demonstrable results year after year, the state's public network gets bipartisan support and funding from the Alabama legislature. The program is free and available to all, with special attention devoted to enlisting often overlooked families in rural, poor, and people of color communities. Alabama is paying and respecting teachers as the professionals they are. This is Jim Hightower saying, if one of our poorest states can rise to meet this basic human need, what's wrong with the richest country in the history of the world? Howdy-ho, folks. Thanks for tuning in and sharing my weekly commentaries. Also, please join me for a live web show I host every other Tuesday, the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the Chat and Chew Cafe. You can join the action live online as I chat with grassroots leaders and progressive sparklies from around the country. Go to hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew to find out about upcoming guests and watch past episodes. That's hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics from the Center for Civic Education. We're joined today by Dr. Scott Casper, president of the American Antiquarian Society. Dr. Casper, how well does the system of separated and shared powers work?
The Constitution is full of shared powers. Let's just take a few as examples. The power to make treaties. The president has the power to make a treaty with a foreign country, but that treaty has to be ratified by 2/3 of the Senate. In the case of impeachment, let's say an officer of the executive branch is impeached. This process involves the House of Representatives. That is, the House brings articles of impeachment. It involves the Senate because the Senate tries the case. And it involves the Supreme Court because the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the presiding officer in the impeachment trial. So in many ways, we have shared powers. And as you go through the Constitution, you can find many, many more of those.
Check out more interviews with Dr. Scott Casper in Unit 2 of the We the People Open course, a free online course on the U.S. Constitution at learn.civiced.org. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
A firing squad or the electric chair? That's Richard Moore's choice. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. What happened when Richard Moore entered a convenience store in Spartanburg, South Carolina in 1999 is not exactly clear. We do know for sure that he was unarmed and that he and the store clerk, James Mahoney, got into an altercation, and that the store owner kept a gun behind the counter, and that during the altercation, Moore, who himself was shot in the arm, shot the clerk who died. And then Moore grabbed a bag of money with $1,400 in it and fled. He was charged with murder, convicted, and sentenced to die. Another fact, drug companies have refused to supply drugs for executions, and so South Carolina, unable to secure lethal injection drugs, passed a law making the electric chair the state's default method of execution, with a firing squad as an alternative. In a recent court filing, Moore chose a firing squad, which calls for the condemned to be strapped to a chair, a hood put over his head, and 3 volunteer prison employees to fire their rifles at his heart. His execution date, April 29th. Moore and his lawyers contend that both the electric chair and a firing squad constitute cruel and unusual punishment. The government says both, legally, are fine. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. It was the first day of the Pullman Strike. The strike started in the company town of Pullman on the south side of Chicago. George Pullman made his fortune making luxury sleeping cars for passenger trains. His cars revolutionized the rail industry, making long-distance travel a much more pleasant experience. Pullman founded a model town for his employees. In 1893, an economic crash devastated the U.S. economy. Pullman egregiously lowered the pay of his workers by as much as a third. But he did not lower rents in the company town, and did not decrease the dividends he paid to his stockholders. Outraged, the Pullman employees called for a strike. The strike was led by the American Railway Union and its leader, Eugene V. Debs. When the union held its convention in Chicago that June, the delegates voted to boycott any train that included a Pullman car. More than 250,000 railroad workers in 27 states and U.S. territories supported the boycott. Angry businessmen demanded that something be done. President Grover Cleveland promised intervention if any train carrying U.S. mail was halted by the boycott. Railroad owners quickly attached mail cars to as many trains as they could. President Cleveland declared, "If it takes every dollar in the U.S. Treasury and every soldier in the United States Army to deliver a postcard in Chicago, that postcard shall be delivered." Federal troops brutally crushed the strike. 30 people died and more were injured. A federal injunction was filed against Eugene Debs, and he went to jail for 6 months for refusing to stop his support of the boycott. The Pullman strike marked a new level of federal intervention against the cause of labor. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 45 degrees Fahrenheit, but we are expecting a pleasant high in the mid-60s or a tad warmer here at the mothership, as it is wont to do, of course. Winds will be out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Cloudy skies overnight with lows in the mid-40s. Winds out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10. And then, we're going to drop in temperature tomorrow, a high around 54, cloudy with an occasional rain shower throughout the day, actually bringing with it somewhat of a bit of rain, almost another quarter inch. It looks like we're getting a few more days of precipitous water falling from the sky, which is still good, but we're getting a little bit of a drying out and a warming period, at least for today. Confirmed cases in coronavirus have not been updated, and I know it's not because we have no more infections. I have a terrible feeling, as we reported earlier, so many home tests are being tested but not reported to the county. So we still stand at 432,045 confirmed cases, and our deceased continue to stand at 531. But I know that that's not true, because I know at my sister's hospital, they're still having COVID infections and deaths. All right, we'll try to figure that one out. Grass pollen is rated as low right outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is good at 24 parts per million. And of course, as I've mentioned before, that means that people will go and burn their smelly trash. Why do they do it? Because they are able and allowed to. It's crazy. That daytime UV index is in the high range at level 7, so continue to take care. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.3 inches. Visibility says it's a quarter mile. Oh, yeah, I guess I believe it. We're still foggy and cloudy at this point, and relative humidity is at 93%. We will have some clearing, but right now it's a bit foggy. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 58 degrees with a rain shower. What do you expect? Paris is 78 and fair. Oh, that's lovely. Roma is 78 and fair. Kyiv is 68 and partly cloudy with a lot of bombs. Kabul is 68 and clear with a lot of burkas. Hong Kong is 77 with a light rain shower and some really patriotic Chinese from Beijing taking over. Tokyo is 64 and mostly cloudy. Well, they're in a new security pact with some NATO nations, so, Atlantic, Pacific, I don't know what we call it. Sydney, Australia is 62 with rain. Oh, Australia, I love Australia. San Francisco, California is 51 and sunny. Oh, my old stomping grounds. And New York is 63 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world. Brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press staff bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Paraguay's prosecutor of organized crime and drug trafficking cases was slain yesterday, Tuesday, by gunmen on a Colombian beach as he honeymooned with his new wife, who said the attackers came on a jet ski or small boat. Prosecutor Marcelo Pecci married journalist Claudia Aguilera in April. Aguilera had recently shared photos on social media showing her and Pecci on the Baru Peninsula in the Caribbean, south of the Colombian city of Cartagena. I hate to say this, but that was probably a grave mistake. Her final social media posting, hours before the attack, was a photo of herself and her husband with a pair of baby shoes, along with a message, the best wedding gift, the approaching life, that is a testimony to the sweetest love. The Decameron Baru Hotel, where the couple was staying, said the attackers arrived on a jet ski and shot the couple while they were on the beach. The gunman also fired at a hotel security guard who was unhurt. Aguilera, who was not hurt in the attack, said the two attackers came on a small boat or jet ski, saying she couldn't remember precisely. One of them got off and, without saying a word, shot Marcelo twice, once in the face and once in the back.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
And even more anonymous staff from the Associated Press, and who can blame them, brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A court in El Salvador has sentenced a woman who suffered an obstetric emergency that ended her pregnancy to 30 years in prison for aggravated homicide. The Citizen Group for the Decriminalization of Abortion said Tuesday in a statement that a woman they identified only as Esme was sentenced on Monday. The woman had already been in pretrial detention for 2 years following her arrest when she sought medical care in a public hospital. The judge acted with partiality, giving greater weight to the version offered by the Attorney General's office, which was loaded with stigmas and gender stereotypes, the group said. And they also said they would appeal. The sentence could not immediately be confirmed because the courts were closed for Mother's Day. Soon to be coming to a country called the USA near you. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.